All right, second try's the charm, I guess. I tried recording this yesterday, but there was something wrong with my microphone, and, well, hopefully it doesn't do it again. So today I want to talk about Ultima 5. We talked about Ultima 4 last week, right, where I talked about how, there's this, there was this, world that was kind of a generic fantasy world for a while, fight evil monsters, win big, destroy evil creatures and sorcerers and all that stuff. Ultima 4 made a big change to CRPGs. I mean, maybe it didn't make a big change to CRPGs, but it was itself a very unique CRPG, right? It created these 8 virtues, and the goal of the game was not to kill some, big monster, but to prove yourself to be worthy of these 8 virtues. Now, the cool thing about Ultima 5 is that what it does is it takes what you got out of Ultima 4, the 8 virtues, and it turns it on its head. Basically what has happened is that you get, after you finish Ultima 4, you kind of get warped back to the real world. And, you wait until Ultima 5 comes out, and then Ultima 5 is like, oh, you get brought back into Britannia. We'll get into a little bit of that in a minute, but the interesting thing about Ultima 5, and this is something that Ultima does from 5 to 6 as well, is that the seed that was planted in 4, the virtues, are now turned into something else in 5, where basically the virtues have been twisted to a form that helps to, I guess you would say, support a tyrannical regime that's going on. So in Ultima 4, the goal was to serve the virtues, to do virtuous things, to buy reagents from the blind shopkeeper and give them the right amount of money, to give money to beggars, to give blood, to complete quests, to fight evil monsters, but to avoid fighting non-evil monsters. Things like that. In this one, we've got and in Ultima 4 there wasn't really a whole lot of plot going on, right? It was pretty simple. It was gather a party, find the runes, find the mantras, find the runes, find the shrines, find the dungeons, solve the things, get Avatar Hood, go to the Abyss, drop the Codex into the Abyss. Something like that, right? Or place the Codex where it belongs in the Abyss. In this one, we've actually got more of a plot, and there's some good points to this, and there's some bad points to this, because the original intro text to Ultima 4 that I read was about 750 words, right? It was not too long, it was pretty short, and it did a very good job of pulling you, the player, into the role of the character that you're going to play in the game, right? There was a lot about how you're feeling, about how relatable things about how your life is going, and maybe, you're kind of hoping for some kind of an escape. In this one, Garriott still does a good job. Let's put it that way. But what we have for the intro text is now nearly 3 times as long. It's a little under 2,000 words, I believe. And it has, 3 chapters. It's a pretty solid little short story, honestly. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I do want to go through a little bit of it, and then we can talk a little bit about how it falls a little bit short of the drawing you in ability of Ultima 4, where there was a lot of mystery and a lot of how you're feeling about these things in there. And in this one, it's actually a fairly standard kind of exposition dump by Iolo. There's also a funny thing about this too, right? Is that in the intro to Ultima 5, you meet Iolo and Shamino, the Bard and Ranger, respectively. They could have been a part of your party in Ultima 4 if you were not playing a Bard or a Ranger. In those cases, they are just NPCs in the cities that won't join you, basically, because you can't have 2 members of the same class, the same virtue, in the party. And so already there's a little iffiness here in the sense that if you played a Bard or if you played a Ranger, you're going to be, meeting up with characters that your avatar certainly had nothing to do with, in any significant way in the previous adventure. So with those assumptions, when you start Ultima 5, you get, this introduction. It has 3 sections. Section 1 is the summoning, where it talks about how you're kind of sleeping in bed, and you're kind of like, just feeling a little bit, not depressed, but just kind of bored, and how you kind of wish that there was some kind of great adventure for you. Because at the end of Ultima 4, the ending of Ultima 4 implies that you get home and your home has been burgled in your absence. And, you've gone through a great trial and you've built up your mental and physical fortitude by adventuring in Britannia. But at the same time, you're coming back and you're better equipped to deal with the problems that you have, but there's also some downsides, like, your house is just empty for a while and somebody was like, oh, free stuff. So in Ultima 5, we start out with the summoning, where you're basically laying in bed and like, oh man, just kind of, you're not getting pulled apart from all directions like in Ultima 4, but you're just kind of like, I wish there was more adventure in my life kind of thing. And, suddenly there's this glowing light, an amulet appears, it has the emblem of the Codex of Ultimate Wisdom on it. You pick it up, you go to the Circle of Stones, you grab your Ankh, you pick up the you go to the Circle of Stones, and, it tells how, like, you had gone back there again and again early on looking for another door to Britannia, but you never found it, and you kind of just stopped going. But this time you go there, and you put the amulet down, and it creates a blue door. Bam, you're in Britannia. We go to the second section of the story, which is the arrival. Basically, you show up in a forest, and you're like, what's going on? It's a dark and stormy night. Shimino runs up. He's like, okay, hold on. I know you have questions, but we were not sure that this was going to work, and you need to come with me right now. And so you pick up the Ankh, you pick up the amulet, and all of a sudden these three creatures appear. Shimino calls them Shadow Lords, and they shoot an arrow of darkness at Shimino, knocking him out of the picture. And basically, you're about to get taken out by them. You show them the amulet, and they recede into the darkness. Now, the black arrow is kind of nice because it's kind of reminiscent of the Morgul blade in Lord of the Rings, right? And then the wound starts to fester and stuff like that. After that, the third part, basically, Shimino says, let's go to Iolo's hut. He's just a little ways to the east of here, and we should be able to find some medical attention for me there. So you go to Iolo's hut. Iolo used to live in the city of Britain, but now he lives in this hut. And the question that the player might be asking is why. And so Iolo kind of goes into a little bit of a monologue here, where he talks about what's been going on in Britannia since you left. And that's the part I want to read. I don't want to read the whole 2,000 word thing, which is a nice little short story, honestly, and very good to kind of pull the player into the initial part of the game. but I just want to kind of get these events out in the open. Not long after thy departure, Lord British and the most prominent wizards of Britannia gathered at his castle and called a meeting of the Great Council. Among the acts of the Great Council was the sealing of the dungeons that lie beneath Britannia in hopes of entombing the foul denizens that dwell within. Some creatures still manage to escape, but their eyes are unaccustomed to light. They rarely roam the countryside by day, but wary must be the traveler by night. Another act of the Great Council, and by far the most difficult, was to raise the Codex from the depths of the abyss. The influx of the combined magical power of the Great Council disrupted the very bowels of Britannia. Where once was the abyss, now stands an immense mountain, created from the molten lava that spewed forth. Unbeknownst to the Council, our new and glorious mountain left an enormous void over which all of Britannia rests. Some speculate that the dungeons may reach into this underground void at their deepest levels. It is believed that the underworld has become a vast breeding ground for creatures who have grown into horrors far worse than their original forms. A band of adventurers chanced upon a tunnel beneath the river that flows through Spiritwood, where one of these caverns collapsed, opening a passage to the underworld. They returned, weary and bewildered, with tales of creatures that mount the dark air and others that shake the ground. Lord British was intrigued by these tales and gathered an entourage of stalwart fighters to accompany him into the underworld. But his party was overwhelmed by the tremendous number and power of these creatures, though they fought valiantly. Panic erupted throughout Britannia when the sole survivor of the expedition returned with a small parchment, upon which was recorded the dread tale of their journey. Iolo pauses momentarily as he reflects upon these dark thoughts. Blackthorn, a trusted but ambitious subject, took over the ruling of Britannia to calm the ensuing chaos. This we accepted until the Shadow Lords appeared. They corrupted Blackthorn in some manner, unbeknownst to us, and Blackthorn's reign is now one of oppression and tyranny. Through him, the meaning of the virtues has been corrupted to serve the self-righteous. Shamino, myself, and others thou hast known, have been declared outlaws by Blackthorn's regime and must skulk about as common criminals. We keep distance between ourselves so that we canst not be rounded up in one fell swoop. But this cannot go on forever. Blackthorn and those hellish Shadow Lords are bleeding Britannia. Rule must be restored to Lord British, if he still lives. The gravity of the matter compelled us to risk a meeting. We arrived only at the only possible answer, to attempt to summon thee, my friend, to aid us in our quest to discover the fate of Lord British. The risk was great, for no use of strong magical power goes unnoticed by the Shadow Lords, but we felt there was no other choice. So, here we have something that is unique, or new, I guess, to the Ultima series, right? It's real plot. We have, you left the world as Avatar, and you showed that, these virtues could be followed, and you could defeat a lot of evil by doing so. The whole point of the virtues was that Lord British was trying to have the people fight the evil within themselves, rather than necessarily fighting evil that happens to be outside of them. That the evil inside them is more insidious, perhaps. So now we have a bunch of things happening that actually push the plot. And they give us a quest, but it's one that's a lot more vague than the quest of the Avatar. The quest of the Avatar was pretty simple. You need to become an Avatar and all these things. You need to take the Codex of Ultimate Wisdom and bring it to the Abyss. You need to, get runes, get mantras, get stones, visit shrines, that kind of stuff. It was pretty straightforward. Ultima 4 is actually not that long of a game, honestly. You can probably finish it in a couple of hours if you know exactly what you're doing. And the other thing about Ultima 4 is that the whole world is kind of with you, right? Pretty much. All the towns are kind of like, yeah, we support your quest to try to become the Avatar. We're going to give you a few puzzles here and there to kind of make you figure things out. But it's going to be pretty straightforward for you to do what you want and get the things that you need from us. We're all going to happily sell you things. The guards are going to protect the towns. The guards are going to make sure that, no evil happens to you either, kind of thing. And this game turns everything on its head. Instead of being the heroic Avatar that is beloved by the people, you are basically skulking around these cities and avoiding the guards because the guards are going to, shake you down or attack you or something like that. You're fighting against the established authority of the world at this point because it's not known whether Lord British lives or not. That's another interesting point, of course, is that, Lord British is dead. This is, what do we do with that? And so, your quest in Ultima 5 is a little bit more vague, right? You're going to need to probably grab the stuff that you get grabbed in Ultima 4 to access the shrines and dungeons and stuff like that. But you've got this now the whole world is, or at least a good chunk of it, is actually against you. There are going to be people who are going to be using these twisted virtues to their own benefit, and are you going to be able to maintain your avatarhood by doing so? It's worth actually looking at some of these, this Blackthorn's code of virtues, right? So what's worth noting about them is that they basically create an unlimited number of catch-22s for someone trying to be virtuous. Especially if the virtue that they're trying to uphold goes against the regime in some way. So here we go. Honesty. Thou shalt not lie, or thou shalt lose thy tongue. Compassion. Thou shalt help those in need, or thou shalt suffer the same need. Valor. Thou shalt fight to the death if challenged, or thou shalt be banished as a coward. Justice. Thou shalt confess to thy crime, and suffer its just punishment, or thou shalt be put to death. That's a really insidious one. Sacrifice. Thou shalt donate half thy income to charity, or thou shalt have no income. Honor. If thou dost lose thine own honor, thou shalt take thine own life. Spirituality. Thou shalt enforce the laws of virtue, or thou shalt die as a heretic. Humility. Thou shalt humble thyself to thy superiors, or thou shalt suffer their wrath. You notice that some of these are, these are all bad, right? But they all kind of play off of the virtues in a very interesting way. Right? For honesty, thou shalt not lie. Well, who determines truth, right? Well, that's a very open question. Compassion, thou shalt help those in need, or thou shalt suffer the same need. What this creates is, in the city of Britain, for instance, the guards just walk around and shake people down for cash, for charity, right? For valor, basically the guards can challenge you to a fight, and if you fight them, then you're fighting the guards, and therefore you're breaking, the laws of humility and justice. Or or if you decline to fight, you're a coward, and they can beat you up, or knock you out, or take you out of the city anyway. For justice, the justice one's really bad, right? Because the whole question of justice is whether the person is guilty or not. And for someone to deny guilt being its own crime with a punishment of death means that the regime can basically say whatever's a crime that they want, and anybody who says, I didn't do that, well, they're guilty. And anyone who says, well, I did that, but that's not, I didn't break this law, they're guilty, that kind of stuff. Sacrifice is kind of similar to compassion in that the guards walk around shaking people down. Honor is a little bit more vague, but it's one of those things where it's trying to compel you to take your own life for reasons that other people will give you. Spirituality forces people to enforce the code as it's written. And humility is another insidious one, because it means that people have to be humble to, Blackthorn. Who are thy superiors, right? Well, it's the regime. So, starting from the really positive virtues of 4, we come to the twisted virtues of 5. And this is something that Garriott does again going from 5 to 6, because in 5, we discover this underground area, this underworld, and there we discover some gargoyles, right? And the gargoyles are just enemy mobs in Ultima 5. There's no... I think there might be like one that you can talk to or something like that, but there's almost no communication with them whatsoever. They're pretty much similar to like the Balrons in Ultima 4, right? They're just enemies. And what happens is that the gargoyles in 5 become the chief element of the story in Ultima 6. This is, I think, it's a really good technique to kind of bring a story through different stages for different, say, games, or even different series of stories or series of books. In Ultima 4, we introduce the virtues. The virtues are a good thing. In Ultima 5, we twist the virtues and kind of close the loop with the virtue question, right? And then we introduce the gargoyles as something that you really can't interact with in any meaningful way. But then we take those interactions that you had, and we say, oh, well, this spurred, the events of Ultima 6 and spurred the gargoyles to go after, Britannia in the False Prophet. Sort of a similar thing is done between 7 and 8, right? In 7, the whole way that the game starts is with a message from this new foe called the Guardian. And you don't ever fight the Guardian in 7. But then the start to 8 is basically the Avatar getting pulled out of Britannia and thrown into Pagan by the Guardian. So, this is something that is a good technique, especially for something that's intended to be a series. Take a thing, establish it, and then in the next thing, twist it, and then take something else and establish that, and then twist that for the next one, establish something else, etc. If you can. Kind of a nice technique. Now, what I'm going to say about the story part that I read here is that, number one, it's a lot longer. And there's a good reason for that, right? You need to actually have an exposition dump to explain all the plot points, because this game actually has a plot. There's actually a thing happening that characters are, in situations at this point. Iolo was living in a hut in the wilderness somewhere between Britain and you, instead of just living in Britain as he did in Ultima 4. And we have this new character, Blackthorn, who we don't know exactly how much of what's happened is his doing versus the Shadow Lords, right? There's a little bit of mystery there too, which is also good. But at the same time, generally speaking, straight up character giving exposition dump is usually a bad idea, and you can see a little bit of it here. And there's a lot less of like the language that was in 4 that kind of brings you personally into the role of that character. It's worth remembering that the Ultima series is not. It's a computer role-playing game, but it's different from like one of like the early Fallouts, right? Where you make a character and then you kind of shape the world in some way, and you have a variety of effects in the world. In Ultima, you kind of have a goal, and certainly if you want to, you can use the Skull of Mondane and blow up a city if you want, but you're not going to win the game by doing that, if that makes sense. So you're given a quest, you're given a goal, and it's up to you how to complete that goal. And there's a lot of like character interactions on the way there. You have to talk to people. You have to figure out clues. You have to synthesize all this information that you're getting. In Ultima 5, there's more of that, because not only do you have to synthesize information that you're getting, you have to figure out where to get this information from, like resistance members that are hiding. So you have to do a little bit more sleuthing, and you have to be a little bit more careful who you trust in Ultima 5, because there are some people who will, backstab you, basically. But the thing I wanted to get to was this writing technique of. Oh, and by the way, before we finish up, I do want to say that Richard Garriott, I think, realized that he was being a little bit too wordy in Ultima 5, because Ultima 6's intro is, like, I would say significantly, by a reasonable margin, my favorite introduction to any game I've ever played, ever. It's incredible. It explains the story in a non-expositionary way. It draws the character into the role of this avatar character. It is not too wordy. It's concise. It uses powerful words in a very well-directed manner. And so, like, this is kind of the problem of, like, trying to put a plot onto something that you haven't put a plot onto before. You can end up being a little bit too wordy, a little bit too clunky in your exposition. And when we'll see next week, Ultima 6, I'll talk about that one a bit. And it's fantastic. The intro to that game is fantastic. The game itself, I have to say that the game itself is a little bit clunky to play, because there's so much being tried to be done in the game. And actually, compared to the PC version, I'm almost inclined to say that the Super Nintendo version of The False Prophet might be the superior version of that game. It's iffy, because there are a few things that you can't do in the Super Nintendo version that you can do in the PC version, but at the same time, the PC version is kind of cluttered, right? You have this whole generally speaking, you have, well, you know what? We'll pass on that for now. I'll show some screens from Ultima 6 in the next video that we talk about this on, because this is one of those design things that I think was kind of a little bit of I think that was the big mistake of Ultima 6, but we'll get to that. Anyway, I want to say that the beauty of Ultima 5 is that now we actually have a real plot for this game. We have characters that have their own desires and their own goals, and we're not, generally speaking, we may find ourselves at odds with some of them, and so now we have a much more complex way to interact with things, because you can't necessarily trust what the people say, and you can't necessarily just walk around in the towns like you own the place. The story is a little bit more complex, and the intro is 2,000 words. It's really not that much, but it is noticeably longer than the first one, or than Ultima 4. And so I just wanted to make note of that. But the game itself is incredibly good. It's more difficult than Ultima 4. Like Ultima 4, you can, I kind of played through most of Ultima 4 as a kid, but Ultima 5 was always, well, how would I say this? Like just a little bit beyond my comprehension, until I tried playing through it maybe 10 years ago or something like that, and I finally did actually play through the whole thing. Ultima 5 is a fantastic game, and a lot of fun, and a lot of like you definitely should keep a notebook of what's going on in that game, because the goals are not quite as clear cut as they are in 4. Whereas in 4, you can probably just like make like an 8x8 matrix and be like, rune, mantra, stone, dungeon, kind of thing, and get most of the way there. But yeah, kind of a fantastic game series in my opinion, especially 4 through 6 and 7 as well. But the 4 through 6 is kind of like this trilogy, because you can take your character from 4 and import your character to 5, and then import that character to 6, which is kind of a neat gimmick, but it adds continuity to the game. But anyway, very cool technique of introducing something, and in the sequel, messing with it, and then introducing something else, and in the sequel messing with it, as opposed to just trying to okay, we're going to mess with the virtues in this way in this one, then we're going to mess with the virtues again, and then we're going to mess with the virtues again. And that kind of gets repetitive too. The technique of taking something tangentially related to the virtues, the pulling out of the codex from the abyss, the creation of this vast underground, and then taking that and moving that to the next game is I think, a really nice technique. It's like the early Final Fantasy games, right? They were all about 4 crystals, 4 elements, over and over and over and over again. In Final Fantasy IV, we had the dark crystals, but there wasn't really much else to that. That game kind of got by on the merit of its characters rather than the complexity of its story. This one tries to make a more complex story and a more complex world for you to live in, while not ending up as cluttered as because in Ultima 6, for instance, you can pick up forks off of tables and stuff. It's a little bit to the point where it's getting too close to simulation, and it's it starts to interfere with your ability to play the game part of it effectively. But again, we'll get to more of that in Ultima 6. I'll show some pictures of the different versions of that game because it's a very fun game, and Ultima 6 is actually really complicated. It's even 5 is complicated to the point where you might probably end up looking at a walkthrough to finish it. What am I supposed to do with this sandalwood box, right? Kind of thing. Ultima 6 is one of those games where it's you kind of feel like you get it for the first few hours of it. The first run around the world and get all the mantras and get all the stones and kind of fight back a little bit against the gargoyles. But after that, the game gets a lot more vague about what your goals are, and Ultima 6 is a fairly complex game to finish, actually. At least it has been for me. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Ultima 5. Just to summarize, take a thing, create it in the first game, mess with it in the second game, but don't do it over and over and over again. Pick something else, maybe even something tangentially related in the second game, make it new, and then take that new thing and make that the topic of the third game. And then finally, watch out for overuse of exposition, exposition monologues, basically. 4 was really good for being concise and being personal. 5 is a little bit more impersonal. It lacks the bite of those emotional prompts for you. But 6 gets it right again. So we'll see about that next time. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Hopefully the audio on this worked this time. Anyway. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you like what I'm doing on this channel, you know what to do. Otherwise, I will see you next time. I'm going to probably be putting out videos a little bit. I'm not going to try to force myself to put out a video every day. It's just not conducive to things. It makes it difficult to do something that actually looks at something in a more deep way, do a little research, do a little planning, as opposed to, here's what I think about this. So that's kind of my plan going forward. For the time being, maybe I'll get faster at making these things, and that'll make it more easy to do these things. But right now, I'm finding that it's cutting into the time of making something that's interesting. So we'll see how that goes. Anyway, it's Friday, so have a good weekend. And the last thing I was it's Thursday, so have a good Friday, and then have a good weekend. But yeah, and happy holidays too. Just Christmas here passed a couple days ago, and New Year's coming up. So. See you soon. Have a good one.